Hi everybody, welcome to Great Books, Big Ideas. I'm Jim. It's time for another reading update. It's Friday, August 29th. We have some very fine Indian summer weather already kicking in here in Pennsylvania, and I'm just enjoying it. The breath of fall is in the air. I wanted to update you all on one book that I finished this week, and then a whole bunch of books that I'm actively reading and enjoying all of them. We'll start with the book I finished. This is a Folio Society edition of Orlando by Virginia Woolf. I got this, I don't know, maybe 5 years ago or so as a summer sale buy from Folio Society. You know, their books are really expensive, but every now and then you can get a deal on one. And it comes in a slipcase. Nice sort of burgundy maroon slipcase, and I just enjoyed this book a lot. What is the book about? Well, I would call it a historical fantasy with a modern twist. That is really what's happening here. The book was dedicated to Vita Sackville-West, who was a friend of Virginia Woolf's, I guess a lover too, perhaps. And this is talked about in the introduction by Jeanette Winterston. And there are several illustrations in this volume I want to share with you. So we're going to also jump to the document cam in a second as I talk about what this book is all about. But basically, it's in the guise of a biography. So that is the premise, right? So the narrator is a biographer, but this isn't your typical biography because this is a gender-bending historical fantasy where about halfway through the book, the man who is the subject of the biography, namely Orlando, turns into a woman. Yeah, you heard that right. A man turns into a woman. So this makes it a very timely read, I think. Still has a lot of value today. So let's go over to the document cam and see some of the illustrations, and those will help us to tell the story here. Some of these illustrations come from the original edition, which I think was published by Hogarth Press. But some of them are just additions to that. So here's a painting of Orlando as a boy. So the book starts in the Elizabethan age, and we get a lot of Elizabethan setting. Lots of great descriptions, and there's a lot of texture here that Virginia Woolf paints for us. And again, it's in the guise of a biography. So what happens here, one of the main plot points is that Orlando falls in love with this Russian princess. And there's this very vivid, it's a sort of dreamy, fantasy-like scenery where it's such a frigid winter and the Thames River has frozen over and people are like ice skating all over it. And this is the setting in which he falls for this Russian girl. And then they, it's sort of like a fling, and then they end up it sort of ends up where she flees from him. She gets on a ship and sails away, and he's pining for her and everything. And in the meantime, he's also a poet. He's working on this long poem. I think it's called "The Oak Tree," and it's a manuscript. And he has friendships with poets and writers, and there's a lot of name dropping that happens here. So a lot of the big figures in the literary history of England are, their names crop up, like Shakespeare, and then we start to hop through time in an accelerated fashion as the book goes on. But here is one of the illustrations. Here's the Russian princess as a child, and I think some of these photos came from the original first edition of the book. But anyway, eventually the setting switches. This is the Archduchess Harriet. Some of the setting then changes to like Turkey, like that Istanbul, I think that area, and you have some plot points that happen, and it's around that point in the book, it's around the halfway mark. The plot kind of goes whoa, you know, and it really changes because the gender of Orlando changes to a woman, and that is managed in a very fantasy-like way. All these transformations are handled really well. And you also have transformations in these time hops too, because we go from Elizabethan England to then like a little bit later in the 17th century, and then we hop to the 18th century, and Orlando eventually ends up back in England and is like hobnobbing with people like Alexander Pope and so forth. And then we go to the 19th century, and then we hop again to the 20th century. And you see the coming of age of Orlando, and then also this, once Orlando's gender changes, you get a lot in the way of subject matter that Virginia Woolf likes to write about in books like A Room of One's Own and so on, is like, how are things for women, how is the female perspective change things, how are women perceived, what can they not do in society, and on and on. So that becomes a big topic of discussion here and there. And then, you know, eventually she gets married and has a child, although that isn't really talked about a whole lot. There's another photo, Orlando about the year 1840, I think that says. And then this is the Marmaduke Bonthrop Shelmerdine Esquire. That's the guy she marries. And then I think there's one more photo here, Orlando at the present time. And this, I think, is Vita Sackville West. And so the end of the book, I don't want to give away a whole lot, but it gets pretty murky, very modernist at the end. But some of these big themes in the book emerge, like where you feel like it's this interesting thing. I don't know, I'm not sure I have this right, but to me, there's like this running thread. So Orlando is like the consistent thread running through the ages, but then at the same time, you have these shifting identities. And that seems to be a big theme for me, is like how the self is splintered, or there are many selves in one self. So even though the Orlando thread, there's continuity there, these are like different selves that like develop over time and recur, and there's patterns, there's echoes, but there's also just differences. And this is what's gotten into in a kind of collage-like fashion at the end of the book. I want to see if I can pick out a passage to read with you briefly to give you a flavor for how this is wrapped up towards the end. It's also a meditation or a reflection on time and history, and then also the women's angle on things is a big theme. Okay. All right, I found a passage to read. This is just a long paragraph to give you a flavor. This is toward the end of the book, where we get into this theme of multiplicity of selves. When this happened, Orlando heaved a sigh of relief, lit a cigarette, and puffed for a minute or two in silence. Then she called hesitatingly, as if the person she wanted might not be there. Orlando? For if there are, at a venture, 76 different times, all ticking in the mind at once, how many different people are there not, heaven help us, all having lodgment at one time or another in the human spirit? Some say 2052, so that it is the most usual thing in the world for a person to call directly they are alone. Orlando, if that is one's name, meaning by that, come, come. I'm sick to death of this particular self. I want another. Hence, the astonishing changes we see in our friends. But it is not altogether plain sailing either, for though one may, as Orlando said, being out in the country and needing another self presumably, Orlando, still, the Orlando she needs may not come. These selves of which we are built up, one on top of another, as plates are piled on a waiter's hand, have attachments elsewhere, sympathies, little constitutions and rights of their own. Call them what you will, and for many of these things there is no name, so that one will only come if it is raining, another in a room with green curtains, another when Mrs. Jones is not there, another if you can promise it a glass of wine, and so on. For everybody can multiply from his own experience the different terms which his different selves have made with him, and some are too wildly ridiculous to be mentioned in print at all. Or so Orlando at the turn by the barn, called Orlando, with a note of interrogation in her voice, and waited. Orlando did not come. So you can see there the sort of the modernist sort of depth effect she's going, like there's kind of like zoom in, zoom out, and collaging happening. It gets a little thorny and hard towards the end. The whole book isn't that way. Like the earlier part of the book reads more like historical fantasy, but as you get farther along and as you get closer to the 20th century, like the style sort of gets different, you know. It's almost like the style is reflecting the changes in self that Orlando is experiencing as he/she moves through the book. So I can tell that Virginia Woolf just had a ball writing this novel. Like it seems like she's having great fun. It's rollicking. It's you can see the humor even in that paragraph I read. Wink, wink, nod, nod. There's a lot of like just fun that she's having with it. But I think the book is definitely a worthy read. I'm glad I have it. I'm glad I finally got around to reading it. Would I rank it as her best book? Probably not. I mean, I think Mrs. Dalloway and To the Lighthouse are going to be hard to surpass. And I really like A Room of One's Own too, for her nonfiction writing. But definitely a good read. Orlando by Virginia Woolf, and that is the Folio Society edition. So moving right along, let me talk a little bit about books I'm actively reading. So we'll start with Arnold Weinstein, Morning, Noon, and Night, Finding the Meaning of Life Stages Through Books. I mentioned this in a previous video. This is going along very well. I'm like that much through it so far, and it's like sitting around having a visit with a book lover, and he's telling you all these great things about all the books that he's read and the things that he's learned from them that are about youth, coming of age, experience, innocence and experience, and all the rest. And I'm really, he is just, sometimes his style repeats a little bit. You know, you see someone like the same phrases or words keep cropping up, but that's okay. Like he's a really literate guy, and he really cares about these books. And some of the works that I read about so far in this book include William Blake's Chimney Sweep poems from Songs of Innocence and Experience, the Simplicissimus book by Grimmelshausen that I mentioned in a video or two ago, Huck Finn, Sound and a Fury by William Faulkner, Perseopolis by Marjane Satrapi, a graphic novel. You can see he even shares an image from Perseopolis there. We've got Lazarillo de Tormes, The Hungry Child, We have Balzac's Purgatorio, one of my favorite Balzac stories. People don't read enough Balzac. They just don't read enough of him. The Great Expectations by Charles Dickens, he talks about that. Made me want to reread that one. It's been like such a long time since I read that book. Maybe my favorite Dickens novel. Then he gets into the theme of love, and he talks about Romeo and Juliet by Shakespeare, and Manon Lescaut by Abbé Prévost, a book I'm not as familiar with. Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte, Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte, both just stone cold classics, and Marguerite Duras' The Lover, a book I haven't read. But what he's good at doing here is he makes you want to read these books. That's the mark of a good literary critic, I think, is if their enthusiasm for the books comes across, then they make you want to read them too, or reread them. And that's certainly the case with Morning, Noon, and Night by Arnold Weinstein. What a great little free library find that was. Also, I'm reading the Bible. So in my Great Ideas reading program, year 1 reading list, next up is the Gospel of St. Matthew and also the Acts of the Apostles. So I thought I might show you this Barnes & Noble edition of the Bible. This is the King James version that I bought. I went on this buying spree a few years ago just to treat myself, and I got some of these bonded leather classics published by Barnes & Noble, and this is like really cool illustrations in here. These are Gustave Doré illustrations. So I'll just take a sneak peek at that, show you the book over here on the document cam. Okay, this has a sewn in bookmark. You've got these gilt edges. This is bonded leather. And I'll just jump to the New Testament. And I'm up to chapter 15 in Matthew. So these are, of course, the text is, it's great to read this again. But the illustrations just add so much. Here are the wise men. Here's the flight into Egypt. Here's the massacre of the innocents. Gustave Doré, 19th century, probably the most famous book illustrator of the 19th century. The Sermon on the Mount. The dumb man possessed. Christ in the synagogue. And there poor old John the Baptist, the daughter of Herod, receiving the head of John the Baptist. And there's Jesus healing the sick. And there's just so many illustrations here. So it's really enhancing my read through of Matthew. And then there's also going to be the Acts. So I don't think it's going to take me too long to read those two books. And I'll have more to say about those when I cover them for that series. Also, I'm finally digging back into the Cider House Rules by John Irving. Boy, is this novel pretty good. I'm now almost 200 pages in, but Irving, the pace is slow. Like, that's what happens in a John Irving novel. You're going to move at a snail's pace. But boy, do you get immersed in the characters and the settings. The setting of the St. Cloud, the orphanage, and Wilbur Larch, the doctor, who's also an abortionist doing these illegal abortions because abortion was illegal back then. And Homer Wells, an orphan who is just growing old, like into the orphanage, no one has adopted him. And then all these side characters, very Dickensian that way. And I'm finally getting, and it wasn't that I had any problem early on with it. I was just reading so much other stuff. This would just got pushed to the background. But now that I've cleared the decks more, I'm dedicating more time into this and really getting a lot out of it. It's very, very well done so far. So that is the Cider House Rules. And then I am making my way through Mega Trends by John Naisbitt. This is fun because I'm comparing this futurist now that I'm in his future. This was written in the 80s. And I'm just kind of going chapter by chapter. I'll definitely do a video on this, at least one, when I get through it. I picked up American Pastoral by Philip Roth, picked up where I left off in the ebook, and now I'm reading this paperback copy that I found in a little free library. This is really well done too, and now you're really getting into like the generational divide that happened in the 1960s and 70s. So this book is very much kind of about like the American dream, and this Jewish guy from Newark who goes by the nickname of the Swede, because like he's sort of like a blonde-haired, breaks the Jewish stereotype, athletic guy, you know, football star, star athlete who married like Miss New Jersey. You know, it's just kind of this charmed family. He's had a lot of success. He has a glove factory in Newark, and then his daughter ends up on the lam because she was somehow involved in the bombing of a post office and a store. I think it was a store next door to the post office, and a man died in that explosion. And now the daughter is a fugitive, and it's recounting a lot of this backstory now as you get into that. And, you're just getting into a reminder of how fraught things got in the 60s with the protests and a lot of violence. I mean, America is just a violent country, and none of that has stopped. It's only gotten worse, I think. But yeah, it's good. It's good so far. So yeah, I think I'm gonna push through that one pretty fast. I'm also reading The Great Ideas Today, 1971. This article I'm currently reading, which is about classical studies, is really up my alley. It's very interesting. So I'm reading about, the Etruscans and deciphering undecipherable scripts, and getting now up into like the Dead Sea Scrolls, like all these sort of discoveries that were, a hot topic in like 1971. So that's going well. And then on my Kobo e-reader, I'm reading a book. I haven't mentioned this book at all really on the channel, but I just read a really, really good chapter from it. And that is, I think it's called Becoming Animal by David Abram. And it's a nonfiction book where, it's hard to summarize this, but it's sort of about tuning in to nature and the animal world and animal consciousness. And I guess in a lot of ways, it's like a deep ecology type of book. And I read another book by him that I liked a lot called Spell of the Sensuous. And this chapter I just read, I thought was maybe the best chapter in the book so far. It was where he was talking about being in Nepal. And Abram is also a magician, and he was like seeking like folk magicians in the local culture among the Sherpas and so forth. He's in the Himalayan mountains, and he goes on a hunt, and he just talks about all the superstitions around these people and how he gets to know one of these guys, and he wants to share his magic and learn their magic. And it's just really really a good book. I'm glad to be back into it, and that is called Becoming Animal by David Abram. So I'm about 70% through it. As I've said before, like I feel like I just read the ebooks slower than the print books for some reason. And that's gotten worse over the last year or two, but I am making some steady progress. So those are the books that are sort of actively being pursued, and then there's others on the periphery of that. But I wanted to share with you, Orlando, if you've read that book, tell me what your thoughts are on it. And also, any of these other books I mentioned, I hope you'll comment on them, ask questions, and get into some back and forth in the comments field. You can always drop me a line by email. The email's in the show description. And I thank you for joining me on this little reading update. I hope everyone, if you're watching this in real time, I hope you have a great weekend and happy reading. Bye-bye.